At the cow-calf level, one of the most basic considerations is just to do the animal management and the other things that add value to these calves. And these are not new technologies or new ideas. They've been around for a long time, and yet we still observe a lot of calves that come through marketing systems that have not been dehorned, they have not been castrated, they have not been vaccinated or weaned. And yet all of these things add value. Failure to dehorn horned cattle does result in a discount. Our research shows that. Castrating bull calves likewise will add value to those calves relative to leaving them as bull calves. Vaccinated calves and weaned calves bring a premium. And if you do all of these things as part of a preconditioning program, particularly one that is a certified or a recognized program that's verified by a third party, there's additional value in those things. And again, we'll take a look at some premiums in just a second that demonstrate that. Beyond the individual animals, again, marketing animals in larger lot sizes adds value. The auction data that we have is very clear that even going from selling 1 or 2 head at a time to 5 to 10 head at a time will add significant value to each one of those animals. So the more you can put into a lot, the better, as long as they're uniform. Lack of uniformity will offset that, and they will be discounted. So you can't put 5 head together that vary by 200 pounds in weight. That will get discounted. So there's a bit of a trade-off there. But again, from a cow-calf perspective, if you think about the value of a defined calving season, that helps get those calves closer together in age, and it gives you a better opportunity to have larger lots of animals that you can manage. And this is going to be true all the way up to at least truckload lots, where the bigger the lots of uniform animals, you will see every animal bring a premium over small lots. And then, of course, longer term, as you make changes to genetics, you're going to change the general size, frame size, and muscling of these animals. And so you may change the overall quality of these animals and add value to them as well when you look at that. Okay. Here's a look at data from 2016 for the Oklahoma Quality Beef Network program. It varies a little bit by weight, but you can see for both steers and heifers, at least for the calves and the lighter weight or middle weight feeder cattle, there's an average of roughly, let's say, a $10 a hundredweight premium. So on a 500-pound calf, we're looking at about $50 a head in premiums. This is for weaning these calves, at least 45 days. Giving them a health protocol, including 2 rounds of vaccinations and so on, according to the protocol required for these programs. But the point is, those premiums are pretty consistently there. We observe these over time, and this and many other kinds of preconditioning programs that might be available to a producer. As I mentioned earlier, it is important, if you're going to invest in a preconditioning program, to add value to these calves, it's important to also think about then where will you sell them, and will you sell them in a market setting so that there are buyers there who value those characteristics that you've added to those cattle and really will provide the payment for them, as opposed to someone who's not in a position to be able to offer a premium for those calves. As we look at price signals in the cattle industry, it's important to take a quick look and think about what goes on in the beef industry. Obviously, we use forage primarily to produce cows and calves. If we look over here on the left side, if we go all the way to the feedlot side, we're using lots of grain at the end of this production period to produce these animals ready for slaughter. The grain feeding is an important part of that, given the meat characteristics that we value in the U.S. system. But in between there, we have a lot of flexibility in changing the proportions of grain and forage. And that drives a lot of the price signals that impact the feeder cattle market, and in particular impact the value of stocker production, which is typically a case where we're putting more gain on these animals outside of feedlots and using less grain than we would once we go to the feedlot and put them on a high concentrate ration. And so there's a lot of economic signals involved in that trade-off Because cattle are ruminants, they have a lot of flexibility, but it also means that there's a lot of need to pay attention to those market signals about how, under certain conditions, we can adjust and need to adjust the cattle production system. And this affects cow-calf producers too, because that retained ownership part following the weaning of those calves can be an important part of that for cow-calf producers as well, extending into that stocker phase. So if you look at it here, what we typically observe in feeder cattle markets is this price to weight line. So, at the calves, at the lighter weight end of this, we have prices that are higher in any given market environment. This is an average over a long period of time prices. And typically, as those cattle are bigger, the price per pound or the price per 100 pounds goes down, but the value of the animals continues to go up when you multiply price times the overall weight of the animals. So cow-calf producers are looking at prices over here in this range, typically to think about where they're selling, what weight they're selling at a particular point in time in the market. Feedlots, certainly once the cattle get up to 750 pounds and bigger, those cattle are clearly going to a feedlot. So we're looking at those cattle from a feedlot buying perspective. That's where the demand is. But oftentimes there's an intermediate level here of where the stocker industry can fit in there, fill in the gaps, if you will, between those lighter weight animals and the weight that feedlots want to buy them at. And there's a lot of things that go on and that affect that, again, to affect stocker production as well as the retained ownership of those stocker cattle from a cow-calf sector. Here's an example from the last few months. If you go back to the fall of 2016, we had a very low, unusual cattle market here. You'll notice the price by weight line is very flat across a wide range here, which means that the price was fairly low in some relative sense, but it was not changing very much. As the animals got bigger, the price was really not changing hardly at all. And we'll see the implications of that in just a minute. Now, if you're a cow-calf producer, you're looking at these low prices. This was a very difficult time period in this particular instance. By the next May, so about 6 or 7 months later, we had seen a significant recovery in these prices. We have the calf prices quite a lot higher, and we have that more typical downward sloping looking relationship to these prices by weight. Again, if you're a cow-calf producer, you're really focused primarily on the absolute value of these prices. That's going to determine your revenues relative to costs that are pretty fixed and determine your overall profitability. If you're a stocker or a feedlot producer, it's not so much the price level that matters, it's the relative buy and sell price that is going to determine the viability of that operation. You do have other production costs as well, feed costs and death loss and veterinary costs and so on, but it's the buy versus sell price that's going to determine, and stocker and feedlot producers recognize that you can have a good buy-sell margin at low cattle prices. In fact, oftentimes it's easier there than it is at relatively high cattle prices, because when their prices are higher, we tend to see this line have more slope to it, and we'll see in just a second that really impacts things. So if you look at last October, again, a cow-calf producer selling, say, a 500-pound calf, price was pretty low, $1.26. Those calves were only bringing about $630 a head. If you think about taking that animal and putting some weight on it, so if we go over here and think about starting with that 500-pound animal as a beginning weight, and we add value to that animal, once we get up here to about 700 pounds and bigger, the value of all of those pounds is over $1 a pound. In fact, it's darn near as big as the price, not quite, but almost as high as the price, which means there was a relatively large value for putting weight on those cattle. And that's consistent with that price line that we saw that was very flat. By May of this year, in contrast, if you look at early May, we had significantly higher prices. Our 500-pound calf now is bringing almost $900. And if we look at putting additional weight on it, the value of that weight is somewhat less now than it was before. It's about $1 a pound. So there's, if you think about that, there's more incentive as a cow-calf producer to sell this animal as a calf. As a stocker producer, there's a little bit less margin here for you to work with in terms of putting additional weight on that animal. And those are the kinds of changes that help the beef industry react to feed prices and forage values and cattle market conditions. All of those things roll together. In between those two time periods, we had in early March of 2017 a situation where the calf prices were in between, but significantly higher than October. So the calves were bringing over $800 a pound or $800 a head. But if you look at the value of adding weight, starting at 500 pounds, that value in this situation was very low, down here around 60 to 70 cents a pound. And you think about the cost of adding those pounds, it's going to cost you pretty close to that. So what's going on here? What's the difference in these situations, and how do we see that expressed in the market? If we take our chart we looked at earlier, we've got the May prices up here in green, which is a more typical kind of relationship. The October one was unusual in that it was very flat over a wide range of weights there, which gave you a high value of gain, even though the overall price level was low. And in between the two, as these things started to adjust, what we saw was the lightweight calf prices came up faster than the feeder cattle prices. And so at the worst point in here during this transition in March, the calf prices were pretty high, but the feeder cattle prices had not increased very much. And that means that the value of gain was pretty low. So the market was shifting the emphasis back to selling those calves, or as a stocker producer to working with the lighter weight end of things. And then again, since then, of course, we've seen these heavier feeder prices come on up and sort of restore that value of gain. My point here is not that you will remember all of this or that it matters as much as the idea that as a cow-calf or a stocker producer, you really need to look at these price relationships over time. That's going to determine and provide information about what the market really is asking you to do in terms of how these cattle get produced. And so it's going to affect decisions that you would make about retaining these calves through a stocker program. Certainly as a stocker producer, it's going to provide some information about the overall profit potential of these stocker operations, but also in many cases give you guidance on what weights of cattle to be thinking about buying and selling, how long to own them, and how much weight to put on them. So lots of subtle things going on with the price relationships here.